Well, hey everybody, this is Robert and welcome to Outbreak News TV. Now, we got this CDC health advisory that came across the wires yesterday, and it's a very interesting case of an organism, a disease, that you don't normally see in the United States. And it says multi-state investigation of non-travel associated Burkholderia pseudomalae infections melioidosis in 3 patients, Kansas, Texas, and Minnesota, 2021. And it says the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, the Texas Department of State Health Services, and the Minnesota Department of Health, with assistance from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, are investigating 3 cases of Burkholderia pseudomalae or melioidosis infections. Based on genomic analysis, these 3 cases, 1 male and 2 females, 2 adults and 1 child, may share a potential common source of exposure. Now, the first case was identified in March of this year and was fatal. The 2 other patients were identified in May. 1 is still hospitalized. 1 has been discharged to a transitional care unit. None of the patients' families reported a history of traveling outside the continental United States. Go to the background. It says initial presentation among the 3 patients ranged from cough and shortness of breath to weakness, fatigue, nausea, vomiting, intermittent fever, rash on the trunk, abdomen, and face, and later diagnosed with infectious encephalitis. The fatal case had several risk factors for melioidosis, including COPD and cirrhosis, and died 10 days after being hospitalized. Genomic analysis of the strains suggests a common source, such as an imported product or animal. However, that source has not been positively identified to date. Burkholderia pseudomalae, which is the agent of melioidosis, is a tier 1 select agent. It can infect both animals and humans, and it can be considered a biological agent also, a biological warfare agent. Typically in the United States, if we see a case of this, it's from somebody who traveled to a place where it's endemic. Northern Australia, Thailand, Vietnam, where this organism, this infection, is commonly seen. And then it says, last thing I want to say on this is melioidosis is not considered to be transmitted person to person via air or respiratory droplets in non-laboratory settings. There have only been a few documented cases of person-to-person transmission. Percutaneous inoculation is probably the most frequent route for natural infection. In contrast to other healthcare personnel, laboratory personnel are at risk because some procedures may aerosolize particles and release the bacteria into the air. So, very interesting case. Must be quite an investigation going on, trying to figure out how these 3 people from 3 different states contracted what appears to be a bacteria with a common source. So, yeah, we'll see how this turns out. Let's go to the next page. And this is just earlier this week or last week from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I hope I said that right. And some good news. Researchers there were awarded a $3 million contract from the Defense Threat Reduction Agency in the DoD to create a vaccine to protect against melioidosis. See, the person that's leading the research is Professor Tung Hoang, and I'm not sure if that's a male or a female, but I'll say that Dr. Hoang said the threat to the military and civilian population is real in case of bioterrorism and biowarfare events. We also send our servicemen and women into harm's way stationed in endemic countries where they could be exposed to the bacterium and the disease. Of course, they need protection, likewise with travelers traveling to endemic countries. And in the title of the press release from the University of Hawaii. It says vaccine research for deadly, quote, Vietnam time bomb, close quote, gets the $3 million grant. And they write in this article, the disease skyrocketed during the Vietnam War, hence its common name, the Vietnam time bomb, which killed hundreds of soldiers. Helicopters landing in Vietnam propelled bacteria-laden particles, which were buried in the sand and soil. Soldiers inhaled them. They were misdiagnosed with pneumonia or tuberculosis and died of melioidosis. Then it just talk a little bit about the vaccine itself. It says University of Hawaii researchers studied Burkholderia pseudomallei for more than 10 years. They discovered two specific surface proteins that allow the bacteria to attach to human cells for infection. Now, without these proteins, the bacterium is much less infectious. And Dr. Hoang says, this finding was significant because unlike most viruses, which have less than a dozen proteins, bacteria have thousands of different proteins. It's like finding a needle in a haystack, finding which ones are important for infection and disease, and which ones that can be used for an actual vaccine candidate. Hoang said that they used the two proteins to create a vaccine, and their study showed 100% effectiveness in mice. Unvaccinated mice died within 5 days, while 100% of the vaccinated mice survived for at least 1 month, which was the duration of the study. And this is essentially how they got the funding from the DoD. And let's move on to the next thing. And this is from the CDC. This is the Select Agents and Toxins list. This is essentially the list of the most dangerous of the dangerous. Some only affect humans, some infect animals only, some infect humans and animals, some infect plants. And it says the following biological agents and toxins have been determined to have the potential to pose a severe threat to both human and animal health, to plant health, or to animal and plant products. And there's Burkholderia pseudomallei. I hope I'm saying that right. This list includes everything. Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, Ebola, Lassa fever, toxins like ricin, and then there's stuff that's in animals only, like African swine fever, avian influenza, etc. So this is the list of the nasties right there. And let me go ahead and close out with a little information about the disease from the CDC. In case you're not familiar, again, this is not something that is typically found here. It is predominantly a disease of tropical climates, especially in Southeast Asia and Northern Australia, where it's widespread. The bacteria causing melioidosis are found in contaminated water and soil. It is spread to humans and animals through direct contact with a contaminated source. Humans and animals are believed to acquire the infection by inhalation of contaminated dust or water droplets, ingestion of the contaminated water, and ingestion of soil-contaminated food or other contact with contaminated soil, especially through skin abrasions. And besides people, the animal species that are susceptible to this disease include sheep, goats, swine, horses, cats, dogs, and cattle. There are several types of infection, each with their own set of symptoms. Localized will be just that, localized pain, fever, ulceration, abscess. Pulmonary infection, right? Everything you would expect, cough, chest pain, etc. Bloodstream infection, fever, respiratory distress, disorientation, and disseminated infection, fever, more pains, possible CNS and brain infection, seizures. So very, very serious stuff. Now, healthy people may get melioidosis, but those with underlying conditions are at most at risk for the disease. And this includes people with diabetes, liver disease, COPD, etc., cancer. Risk of exposure. Infection has taken place all over the world. Of course, we talked about places where it's primarily found. The only places this bacteria, called Burkholderia pseudomylae, occurs naturally in the United States are Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. As I said, about a dozen cases are identified each year in the U.S. and have primarily occurred among travelers and immigrants coming from places where the disease is widespread. However, we have seen melioidosis cases in the U.S. with no history of travel. So that's really speaking to the health alert the CDC put out yesterday. Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Northern Australia are the places with the most cases. I keep track of what's happening in Thailand, and they usually have hundreds of cases every year. Anyway, so we'll skip over the rest of that. Is it treatable? Fortunately, yes. It is a bacterium, so it can be treated with antibiotics. Treatment generally starts with IV antimicrobial therapy for a minimum of 2 weeks and up to 8 weeks, depending on how severe the infection is. And then it's followed with months of oral antimicrobials. Ceftazidime, meropenem for the IV therapy. Oral therapy consists of trimethoprim, sulfamethoxazole, or amoxicillin and clavulanic acid. Many of the antibiotics that you see treating other bacterial infections. And last thing I want to talk about is prevention. In areas where the disease is widespread, contact with contaminated soil or water can put people at risk for melioidosis. So the ways you can prevent it is people with open skin wounds and those with diabetes, chronic renal disease are at increased risk for melioidosis and should avoid contact with soil or standing water. Those who perform agricultural work should wear boots, and healthcare workers should use standard precautions when treating patients with melioidosis to prevent infection. And in the laboratory, in the clinical laboratory, you must take all the proper precautions there because of the possible aerosolization. And that's it. An interesting case that the CDC is taking a look at, and we'll keep an eye on that and see if there's any follow-up to this really incredibly interesting case. Again, I appreciate you watching. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and share it with your friends. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment below, and I'll see you next time.